Our vanity, our passions, our spirit of imitation, our abstract intelligence, our habits have long been at work, and it is the task of art to undo this work of theirs, making us travel back in the direction from which we have come, to the depths, where what has really existed lies unknown within us. Marcel Proust. Now, before you click away, bear with me. This is the quote in the next chapter from Robert Greene's best-selling book, Mastery. And this chapter is finally where we get to put everything into play. And what that quote actually means in the big picture is, in essence, Proust's quote underscores the transformative power of art in unraveling the complexities of human existence and guiding us towards a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us. How fantastic is that? So without further ado, welcome to the show. I'm Diane Planadin, and if you're ready to create an inspired life, well, let's get going, because this book is a game changer. And that's why I'm doing each chapter on its own. So if you missed any of the episodes on how we reach this point, I'll link it in the show notes as well. So how Robert Greene opens up to the awaken your dimensional mind, the creative active. Awaken the dimensional mind. He says, as you accumulate more skills and internalize the rules that govern your field, your mind will want to become more active, seeking to use this knowledge in ways that are more suited to your inclinations. What will impede this natural creative dynamic from flourishing is not a lack of talent, but your attitude. Aha. Feeling anxious and insecure, you will tend to turn conservative with your knowledge, preferring to fit into the group and sticking to the procedures you have learned. Instead, you must force yourself in the opposite direction. As you emerge from your apprenticeship, you must become increasingly bold. Instead of feeling complacent about what you know, you must expand your knowledge to related fields, giving your mind fuel to make new associations between different ideas. You must experiment and look at problems from all possible angles. As your thinking grows more fluid, your mind will become increasingly dimensional, seeing more and more aspects of reality. In the end, you will turn against the very rules you have internalized, shaping and reforming them to suit your spirit. Such originality will bring you to the highest of power. So how do we awaken the dimensional mind, the creative, active? Well, he breaks it down for us, and it's so much easier to understand. If we think deeply about our childhood, not just about our memories of it, but how it actually felt, we realize how differently we experienced the world back then. Our minds were completely open, and we entertained all kinds of surprising, original ideas. Things that we now take for granted, things as simple as the night sky or our reflection in the mirror, often caused us to wonder. We had a powerful desire to turn everything around us into a game, to play with circumstances. Let us call this quality the original mind. This mind looked at the world more directly, not through words and received ideas. It was flexible and receptive to new information. Retaining a memory of this original mind, we cannot help but feel nostalgia for the intensity with which we used to experience the world. But then as the years pass, we do lose our childlike capabilities, don't we? So the new way of thinking as we get older, he calls the conventional mind. Now you're under pressure to make a living and conform to society. You force your minds into tighter and tighter grooves. Masters and those who display a high level of creative energy are simply people who manage to retain a sizable portion of their childhood spirit, despite the pressures and demands of adulthood. This spirit manifests itself in their work and in their ways of thinking. Children are naturally creative. Some people maintain their childlike spirit and spontaneity, but their creative energy is dissipated in 1,000 directions, and they never have the patience and discipline to endure an extended apprenticeship. Others have the discipline to accumulate vast amounts of knowledge and become experts in their field, but they have no flexibility of spirit, so their ideas never stray beyond the conventional, and they never become truly creative. Masters manage to blend the two, discipline and a childlike spirit, together into what we shall call the dimensional mind. Such a mind is not constricted by limited experience or habits. It can branch out into all directions and make deep contact with reality. It can explore more dimensions of the world. The conventional mind is passive and it consumes information and regurgitates it in familiar forms. The dimensional mind is active, transforming everything it digests into something new and original, creating instead of consuming. Ooh, that's exciting. Understand, he says, we all possess an inborn creative force that wants to become active. This is the gift of our original mind, which reveals such potential. The human mind is naturally creative, constantly looking to make associations and connections between things and ideas. It wants to explore, to discover new aspects of the world, and to invent. To express this creative force is our greatest desire, and the stifling of it, the source of our misery. What kills the creative force is not age or lack of talent, but our own spirit, our own attitude. We become too comfortable with the knowledge we've gained in our apprenticeship. We grow afraid of entering new ideas and the effort that this requires. To think more flexibly entails a risk. We could fail and be ridiculed. We prefer to live with familiar ideas and habits of thinking, but we pay a steep price for this. Our minds go dead from the lack of challenge and novelty. We reach a limit in our field and lose control over our fate because we become replaceable. What this means, however, is that we equally possess the potential to spark this innate creative force back to life, no matter how old we are. Experiencing a return of this creative force has an immensely therapeutic effect on our spirits and on our career. By understanding how the dimensional mind operates and what helps it flourish, we can consciously revive our mental elasticity and reverse the deadening process. The powers that the dimensional mind can bring are nearly limitless and within the reach of almost all of us. And it gives the example in the book of the story about Mozart, which we all know, famous composer, must have had a charmed life, right? He worked it, and he worked it very hard. And interestingly enough, his father was a music teacher, composer as well as his sister. But normally, back then, you would start a child at the age of 7. Well, when Mozart was 4 years old, his father noticed what a great interest he was taking in the music as he was teaching his sister. And this is what Robert Greene said about the 4-year-old. The mind of a 4-year-old is even more open and impressionable than that of a child a few years older. So he kind of got the upper hand. And his father and sister and him went on tour around Europe, and it exposed him to other people and other ideas and other ways of composing and other musical interests. But where he really thrived is when he finally broke free from the family unit. And at the age of 25, so from age 25 to 35, is where he composed, 22 operas or something like that. Can you imagine what his mind was going through? And it's a very unfortunate thing that he died so young. However, we get to cherish his music forever, ever more. So mastery really made a difference in his life, and he found what he loved and he went for it all the way, right? So, what's important about this dimensional mind? Well, the dimensional mind has two essential requirements. One, a high level of knowledge about a field or subject, and two, the openness and flexibility to use this knowledge in new and original ways. The knowledge that prepares the ground for creative activity largely comes from a rigorous apprenticeship in which we have mastered all the basics. Once the mind is freed from having to learn these basics, it can focus on higher, more creative matters. The problem for us all is that the knowledge we gain in the apprenticeship phase, including numerous rules and procedures, can slowly become a prison. It locks us into certain methods and forms of thinking that are one dimensional instead. The mind must be forced from its conservative positions and made active and exploratory. To awaken the dimensional mind and move through the creative process requires three essential steps. First, choosing the proper creative task, the kind of activity that will maximize our skill and knowledge. Second, loosening and opening up the mind to certain creative strategies. And third, creating the optimal mental conditions for a breakthrough or insight. Finally, throughout the process, we must also be aware of the emotional pitfalls, complacency, boredom, grandiosity, and the like that continually threaten to derail or block our progress. If we can move through the steps while avoiding these traps, we cannot fail to unleash powerful creative forces from within. And I find it interesting that the last opera that Mozart wrote was The Magic Flute, which my impression is it's all about finding your way in the world. So how fantastic is that? So apropos, I love opera. All right, step one, the creative task. The task that you choose to work on must have an obsessive element. Like the life's task, which we talked about in previous episodes, it must connect to something deep within you. The truth is that creative activity is one that involves the entire self, our emotions, our levels of energy, our character, and our minds. With such a deep-rooted interest, you can withstand the setbacks and failures, the days of drudgery and the hard work that are always a part of any creative action. You can ignore the doubters and the critics. You will then feel personally committed to solving the problem and will not rest until you do so. Ooh. Understand, it is the choice of where to direct his or her creative energy that makes the master. Really, what are you going to focus on, right? And he says this is the primary law of the creative dynamic that you must engrave deeply in your mind and never forget. Your emotional commitment to what you are doing will be translated directly into your work. And the receiving end will feel it. They'll feel if you're really all in on what you're creating. He says you must never simply embark on any creative endeavor in your field, placing faith in your own brilliance to see it through. You must make the right, perfect choice for your energies and inclinations. There are two things to keep in mind. First, the task you choose must be realistic. The knowledge and skills you have gained must be eminently suited to pulling it off. To reach your goal, you may have to learn a few new things, but you must have mastered the basics and possess a solid enough grasp of the field so that your mind can focus on higher matters. On the other hand, it's always best to choose a task that is slightly above you, one that might be considered ambitious on your part. This is a corollary of the law of the creative dynamic. The higher the goal, the more energy you will call up from deep within. You will rise to the challenge because you have to, and will discover creative powers in yourself that you never suspected. Second, you must let go of your need for comfort and security. Creative endeavors are by their nature uncertain. You may know your task, but you are never exactly sure where your efforts will lead. If you need everything in your life to be simple and safe, This open-ended nature of the task will fill you with anxiety. If you are worried about what others might think and about how your position in the group might be jeopardized, then you will never really create anything. You will unconsciously tether your mind to certain conventions, and your ideas will grow stale and flat. If you are worried about failure or going through a period of mental and financial instability, then you will violate the primary law of the creative dynamic, and your worries will be reflected in the results. Think of yourself as an explorer. You cannot find anything new if you're unwilling to leave the shore. That was step one, the creative task. And honestly, I love the fact that he's put in, if you're going through a period of mental and financial instability, which unfortunately a lot of people are, and especially with the economy the way it's been going these days, and inflation and interest rates, there's a lot of pressure. You have to release that, if only for a brief moment, while you work on what gives you joy and inspiration in life, where you see yourself going, how you can apply yourself for not only the greater good of others, but for the greater good of your personal well-being and to those that you love and raise and mentor. That's the hard part. And whenever I think, oh man, I cannot focus any time extra, I think of the story of Toni Morrison. Full-time job, had a passion for writing, and definitely squeezed it in. Very short summary of that. But you got to remember, if they can do it, I can do it. Not helping anybody to Netflix and chill. That's where you whittle away on your dream. So, what's next? That was step one. All right. Number two, creative strategies. Ooh, we're going to get into strategies and we're going to get into a lot of detail about it. Think of the mind, he says, as a muscle that naturally tightens up over time unless it is consciously worked upon. He's going to give us 5 strategies for developing such flexibility which we can adapt, all of them, at some point, stretching and loosening the mind in all directions. Yes, your mind is like a muscle. So number 1, cultivate negative capability. What? And he quotes John Keats here on his thoughts of the creative process, which is to let the mind absorb itself in what it experiences without having to form judgments on what it all means. The mind must be able to feel doubt and uncertainty for as long as possible. To accomplish this, we must be capable of negating our ego. Truly creative people in all fields can temporarily suspend their ego and simply experience what they are seeing without the need to assert judgment for as long as possible. All masters possess this negative capability, and it is the source of their creative powers. Open-minded, right? You think more, you're open-minded. To put negative capability into practice, you must develop the habit of suspending the need to judge everything that crosses your path. You consider and even momentarily entertain viewpoints opposite to your own, seeing how they feel. You observe a person or event for a length of time, deliberately holding yourself back from forming an opinion. You seek out what is unfamiliar, for instance, reading books from unfamiliar writers in unrelated fields or from different schools of thought. You do anything to break up your normal train of thinking and your sense that you already know the truth. Negative capability should not be a permanent state of mind. In order to produce work of any sort, we must create limits on what we'll consider. We must organize our thoughts into relatively cohesive patterns and eventually come up with conclusions. In the end, we must make certain judgments. Negative capability is a tool we use in the process to open the mind up temporarily to more possibilities. Once this way of thinking leads to a creative avenue of thought, we can give our ideas a clearer shape and gently let it go, returning to this attitude whenever we feel stale or blocked. Yes, I know. I know. I know. But yes, you have to open up your mind. I love that. Okay, so number 2, and you're not going to believe this one. This is the aha moment that you are going to experience. Number 2 is allow for serendipity. The brain is an instrument developed for making connections. It operates as a dual processing system in which every bit of information that comes in is at the same time compared to other information. The brain is constantly searching for similarities, differences, and relationships between what it processes. Your task is to feed this natural inclination to create the optimal conditions for it to make new and original associations between ideas and experiences. And one of the best ways to accomplish this is by letting go of conscious control and allowing chance to enter into the process. Many of the most interesting and profound discoveries in science occur when the thinker is not concentrating directly on the problem, but is about to drift off to sleep, or get on a bus, or hears a joke. Moments of unstrained attention, when something unexpected enters the mental sphere and triggers a new and fertile connection. Such a chance association of discoveries are known as serendipity. The occurrence of something we are not expecting, and although by their nature you cannot force them to happen, you can invite serendipity into the creative process by taking 2 simple steps. And that's why I said this is the aha moment. We're really going to dive in deep. The first step is to widen your search as far as possible. In the research stage of your project, you look more than what is generally required. You expand your search into other fields, reading and absorbing any related information. And he gives a quote from William James, who expressed it about the mind: transitions from one idea to another, the most unheard of combination of elements, the subtlest associations of analogy. In a word, we seem suddenly introduced to a seething cauldron of ideas where everything is fizzling and bobbling about in a state of bewildering activity. End quote. A kind of mental momentum is generated in which the slightest chance occurrence will spark a fertile idea. That's where the magic happens. And then the second step is to maintain an openness and looseness of spirit. In moments of great tension and searching, you allow yourself moments of release. You take walks, engage in activities outside your work. Einstein played the violin. Or think about something else, no matter how trivial. When some new and unanticipated idea now enters your mind, you do not ignore it because it is rational or does not fit the narrow frame of your previous work. You give it instead full attention and explore where it leads you. Chance favors only the prepared mind. That's a quote from Louis Pasteur that he included in that excerpt. He goes on to say, nothing is taken at face value. A whirring sound is never neutral, never merely a sound, but something to interpret, a possibility, a sign. Dozens of such possibilities lead nowhere, but to an open and fluid mind, they are not only worth considering, but are a constant pleasure to investigate. Perception itself becomes a stimulating exercise in thinking. One reason that serendipity plays such a large role in discoveries and inventions is that our minds are limited. We cannot explore all avenues and imagine every possibility. To help yourself cultivate serendipity, you should keep a notebook with you at all times. The moment any idea or observation comes, you note it down. You keep the notebook by your bed, careful to record ideas that come in those moments of fringe awareness, just before falling asleep or just upon waking. In general, you must adopt a more analogical way of thinking, taking greater advantage of the associative powers of the mind. Thinking in terms of analogies and metaphors can be extremely helpful to the creative process. Train yourself to look constantly for such analogies to reframe and expand your ideas. Next, number 3. alternate the mind through the current. The current is like a mental electrical charge that gains its power through a constant alternation. We observe something in the world that strikes our attention and makes us wonder what it might mean. In thinking about it, we devise several possible explanations. When we look at the phenomenon again, we see it differently as we cycle through the various ideas we had imagined to account for it. Perhaps we conduct experiments to verify or alter our speculations. Now, when we look at the phenomena yet again, weeks or months later, we see more and more aspects of its hidden reality. If we had failed to speculate on the meaning of what we observed, we simply would have had an observation that led us nowhere. If we had speculated without continuing to observe and verify, then we would simply have some random idea floating in our heads. But by continually cycling between speculation and observation/experiment, we are able to pierce deeper and deeper into reality, like a drill that penetrates a piece of wood through its motion. The current is a constant dialogue between our thoughts and reality. If we go into this process deeply enough, we come into contact with a theory that explains something far beyond capability of our limited senses. The current is merely an intensification of the most elementary powers of human consciousness. Most often in culture, we see people who short circuit the current. They observe some phenomena in culture or nature that makes them emotional, and they run rampant with speculation, never taking the time to entertain possible explanations that it could have been verified by further observation. Yeah, it's important to take time to digest. They are afraid to speculate because it seems unscientific and subjective, failing to understand that speculation is the heart and soul of human rationality, our way of connecting to reality and seeing the invisible. Sometimes this fear of speculation masquerades as skepticism. We see this in people who delight in shooting down any theory or explanation before it gets anywhere. They are trying to pass off skepticism as a sign of high intelligence, but in fact, they are taking the easy route. It is quite simple to find arguments against any idea and knock it down from the sidelines. Instead, you must follow the route of all creative thinkers and go in the opposite direction. You then not only speculate, but are bold and audacious with your ideas, all of which forces you to work hard to confirm or disconfirm your theories, piercing into reality in that process. As the great physicist Max Planck put it, scientists must have a vivid, intuitive imagination, for new ideas are not generated by deduction, but by artistically creative imagination. And you don't have to be a scientist to make this work, right? Okay. Number 4, alter your perspective. Alter your perspective. Consider thinking as an extended form of vision that allows us to see more of the world, and creativity as the ability to expand that vision beyond conventional boundaries. How do you do this? Well, he has some most common patterns or pitfalls to avoid here. Number 1, looking at the what instead of the how. Everything in nature has a structure, a way that parts relate to one another, which is generally fluid and not so easy to conceptualize. Our mind naturally tends to separate things out, to think in terms of nouns instead of verbs. In general, you want to pay greater attention to the relationship between things, because that will give you a greater feel for the picture as a whole. Another pitfall, rushing to generalities and ignoring details. In general, try approaching a problem idea with much more open mind. Let your study of the detail guide your thinking and shape your theories. Pitfall number 3, confirming paradigms and ignoring anomalies. We routinely look for patterns in the world that confirm the paradigms we believe in. The things that do not fit the paradigm, the anomalies, tend to be ignored or explained away. In truth, anomalies themselves contain the richest information. They often reveal to us the flaws in our paradigms and open up new ways of looking at the world. You must turn yourself into a detective, deliberately uncovering and looking at the very anomalies that people tend to disregard. Think of anomalies as the creative form of such mutation. They often represent the future, but to our eyes they seem strange. By studying them, you can illuminate this future before anyone else. Next, fixating on what is present, ignoring what is absent. That's the fourth pitfall. This requires more thinking and is harder to conceptualize, but the rewards can be immense if we hit upon this unfulfilled need. One interesting way to begin such a thought process is to look at new and available technology in the world and to imagine how it could be applied in a much different way, meaning a need that we sense exists, but that is not overly apparent. If the need is too obvious, others will already be working on it. The next creative strategy is to revert to primal forms of intelligence. What do you suppose that means? Well, he says visual forms of thinking is simple. Human working memory is limited. We can only keep in mind several pieces of information at the same time. Through an image, we can simultaneously imagine many things at once, at a glance, as opposed to words, which can be impersonal and rigid. A visualization is something we create, something that serves our particular needs of the moment and can represent an idea in a way that is more fluid and real than simply words. The use of images to make sense of the world is perhaps our most primitive form of intelligence and can help us conjure up ideas that we can later verbalize. Words are also abstract. An image or model makes our idea suddenly more concrete, which satisfies our need to see and feel things with our senses. Even if thinking in this way is not natural to you, using diagrams and models to help further the creative process can be immensely productive. Yes, we definitely used images before we started speaking, right? Step 3, the creative breakthrough, tension and insight. This is cool. In the creative lives of almost all masters, we hear of the following pattern. They begin a project with an initial intuition and an excitement about its potential success. Their project is deeply connected to something personal and primal and seems very much alive to them. As their initial nervous excitement inspires them in certain directions, they begin to give their concept shape, narrowing down its possibilities and channeling their energies into ideas that grow more and more distinct. They enter a phase of heightened focus. But masters inevitably possess another quality that complicates the work process. They are not easily satisfied by what they are doing. While able to feel excitement, they also feel doubt about their worthiness of their work. They have high internal standards. As they progress, they begin to detect flaws and difficulties in their original idea that they had not foreseen. This is where the tension heats up, right? As the process begins to become more conscious and less intuitive, that idea, once so alive in them, starts to seem somewhat dead or stale. This is a difficult feeling to endure, and so they work even harder, trying to force a solution. The harder they try, the more inner tension and frustration they create. The sense of staleness grows. In the beginning, their mind teemed with rich associations. Now it seems condemned to a narrow track of thought that does not spark the same connections. At certain points in this process, lesser types would simply give up or settle for what they have, a mediocre and half realized project. But masters are strong. They have been through this before, and on an unconscious level, they understand that they must plow forward and that the frustration or the feeling of being blocked has a purpose. You're on the path. At a particular high point of tension, they let go for a moment. This could be as simply as stopping to work going to sleep, or it could be meaning deciding to take a break or to temporarily work on something. What almost inevitably happens in such moments is that the solution, perfect idea for completing the work, comes to them. This works on children as well. I'm just going to say that out loud. I'm going to link that in the show notes. Mastering the Mini Break. It's amazing. And when you just step back, take a beat, take a moment, it's amazing. He goes on to say, the key is to be aware of this process and to encourage yourself to go as far as you can with your doubts, your reworkings, and your strained efforts, knowing the value and purpose of the frustration and creative blocks you are facing. Think of yourself as your own Zen master. And he gives a tip here to have some self-imposed deadlines, because the feeling that we have endless time to complete our work has an insidious and debilitating effect on our minds. Our attention and thoughts become diffused. Our lack of intensity makes it hard for the brain to jolt into a higher gear. The connections do not occur. For this purpose, you must always try to work with deadlines, whether real or manufactured. Faced with the slenderest amount of time to reach the end, the mind rises to the level you require. Ideas crowd upon one another. You don't have the luxury of feeling frustrated. Every day represents an intense challenge, and every morning you wake up with original ideas and associations to push you along. And he gives the example in the book about Thomas Edison. And I do completely, highly recommend you buy this book, because you're going to want to read it over and over again now that you're in it, right? This is in it to win it. However, we're all human, and we have also some emotional pitfalls to be wary of. One, complacency. Fight this downhill tendency as much as you can by upholding the value of active wonder. Constantly remind yourself of how little you truly know and how mysterious the world remains. Conservatism. Aha. Creeping conservatism will narrow your searches, tether you to comfortable ideas, and create a downward spiral. As the creative spark leaves you, you will find yourself clutching even more forcefully to dead ideas, past successes, and the need to maintain your status. Make creativity rather than comfort your goal, and you will ensure far more success for the future. The next emotional pitfall is dependency, because if you have a mentor, instead of relying on the master for evaluation of your work, you, ever insecure about your work and how it will be judged, come to rely on the opinions of the public. It is not that you must ignore these judgments, but that you must first work hard to develop internal standards and a high degree of independence. Impatience, aha, yes. And he gives a wonderful example here about Leonardo da Vinci. He understood the dangers of impatience. He adopted as his motto the expression ostinato rigore, which translates as stubborn rigor or tenacious application. I've also heard relentless rigor. For every project he involved himself in, and by the end of his life, they numbered in the thousands, he repeated this to himself. So he would attack each one with the same vigor and tenacity. The best way to neutralize our natural impatience is to cultivate a kind of pleasure in pain, like an athlete. You come to enjoy rigorous practice, pushing past your limits and resisting the easy way out. Resisting. I like that. Next is grandiosity. Praise generally does harm. Ever so slowly, the emphasis shifts from joy of the creative process to the love of attention and to our ever-inflating ego. What must ultimately motivate you is the work itself and the process. Public attention is actually a nuisance and a distraction. Such an attitude is the only defense against falling into the trap set by our ego. So to think about there. And finally, inflexibility. Woo. Flexibility is not an easy or natural quality to develop. You must avoid emotional extremes and find a way to feel optimism and doubt at the same time. A difficult sensation to describe in words, but something all masters have experienced. Just have to stay flexible. Keep an open mind. He goes on to say, although it involves much pain, the pleasure that comes from the overall process of creativity is of an intensity that makes us want to repeat it. That is why creative people return again and again to such endeavors, despite all of the anxiety and doubt they stir up. It is nature's way of rewarding us for the effort. If we had no such rewards, people would not engage in such activity, and mankind would suffer irreparably from this loss. This pleasure will be your reward as well, to whatever degree you pursue the process. Well, so how do you do that? What are the strategies for the creative? What are the strategies indeed? Well, the strategies has to work for you in your own personal situation. He gives us 9 highlights in the book, and I'm just going to touch briefly on each one of them because he says there's some basic patterns that we can all detect. 1, the authentic voice, and he uses John Coltrane, a beautiful musician, in his book about that. And he said, John Coltrane, by being patient and following the process, individual expression flowed out of him naturally. He personalized every genre he worked in, from blues to Broadway show tunes. His authentic voice, with its anxious, urgent tone, was a reflection of his uniqueness at birth and came to him in a lengthy, organic process. By expressing his deepest self and his most primal emotions, he created a visceral effect on listeners. Understand the greatest impediment to creativity is your impatience, the almost inevitable desire to hurry up the process, express something, and make a splash. What happens in such a case is that you do not master the basics. You have no real vocabulary at your disposal. What you mistake for being creative and distinctive is more likely an imitation of other people's style or personal rantings that do not really express anything. Audience, however, are hard to fool. They feel the lack of rigor, the imitative quality, the urge to get attention, and they turn their backs or give the mildest praise that quickly passes. The best route to follow is Coltrane's, and to love learning for its own sake. Number 2, creative strategy, the fact of great yield. And he uses Ramachandran in this example. And he said, in looking for facts of great yield, you must follow certain guidelines. Although you are beginning within a particular field that you understand deeply, you must not allow your mind to become tethered to this discipline. Instead, you must read journals and books from all different fields. Sometimes you will find an interesting anomaly in an unrelated discipline that may have implications for your own. You must keep your mind completely open. No item is too small or unimportant to escape your attention. If an apparent anomaly calls into question your own beliefs or assumptions, so much the better. You must speculate on what it could mean, the speculation guiding your subsequent research but not determining your conclusions. If what you have discovered seems to have profound ramifications, you must pursue it with the utmost intensity. Better to look into 10 such facts, with only one yielding a great discovery, than to look into 20 ideas that bring success but have trivial implications. You are the supreme hunter, ever alert, eyes scanning the landscape for the fact that will expose a once hidden reality with profound consequences. Make those connections. Number 3, mechanical intelligence. And I'm going to say this is my favorite strategy of all, just because he references the Wright brothers, who literally had no fancy education, electrical, mechanical, engineering, nothing. And they were the first to take flight without any real compensation. So this is really interesting to understand. Mechanical intelligence is not a degraded form of thinking as compared to abstract reasoning. It is, in fact, the source of many of our reasoning skills and creative powers. Our brain developed to its present size because of the complex operations of our hands. In working with resistant materials to create tools, our ancestors developed a pattern of thinking that transcends manual labor itself. The principles behind mechanical intelligence can be summarized as follows. Whatever you are creating or designing, you must test and use it yourself. Separating out the work will make you lose touch with its functionality. Through intense labor on your part, you gain a feel for what you are creating. In doing this work, you see and feel the flaws in the design. You do not look at the parts separately, but at how they all interact, experiencing what you produce as a whole. What you are trying to create will not magically take off after a few creative bursts of inspiration, but must slowly evolve through a step-by-step process as you correct the flaws. In the end, you win through superior craftsmanship, not marketing. This craftsmanship involves creating something with an elegant, simple structure, getting the most out of your materials, a high form of creativity. Number 4, natural powers. First, it is essential to build into the creative process an initial period that is open-ended. You give yourself time to dream and wander, to start out in a loose and unfocused manner. In this period, you allow the project to associate itself with certain powerful emotions, ones that naturally come out of you as you focus on your ideas. Second, it is best to have wide knowledge of your field and other fields, giving your brain more possible associations and connections. Third, to keep this process alive, you must never settle into complacency, as if your initial vision represents the endpoint. You must cultivate profound dissatisfaction with your work and the need to constantly improve your ideas, along with a sense of uncertainty. You are not exactly sure where to go next, and this uncertainty drives the creative urge and keeps it fresh. Any kind of resistance or obstacle that crosses your path should be seen as yet another chance to improve your work. Finally, you must come to embrace the slowness as a virtue in itself. When it comes to creative endeavors, time is always relative. Whether your project takes months or years to complete, you will always experience a sense of impatience and a desire to get to the end. The single greatest action you can take for acquiring creative power is to reverse this natural impatience. You take pleasure from the laborious research process. You enjoy the slow cooking of the idea, the organic growth that naturally takes shape over time. Patience, such an important virtue. Next, the open field, and he uses a beautiful example of Martha Graham, who basically created a new way of dance. And he says, you must not mistake newness with wild spontaneity. There is nothing that becomes repetitive and boring more quickly than free expression that is not rooted in reality and discipline. You must bring to your new idea all of the knowledge you have acquired in your field, but for the purpose of reversing it. In essence, what you are doing is creating some space in a cluttered culture, claiming for yourself an open field in which you can finally plant something new. People are dying for new, for what expresses the spirit of the time in an original way. By creating something new, you will create your own audience and attain the ultimate position of power in culture. Yes, she was an original, wasn't she? Number 6, the high end. And he gives the example of Yoki Matsuoka, which we discussed in the beginning of our journey, who is an amazing inventor, engineer, creator, IT specialist, and makes these connections that are absolutely amazing. And making these connections, the high end, he says you must make this a model for your own work as well. Your project or the problem you are solving should always be connected to something larger, a bigger question, an overarching idea, an inspiring goal. Whenever your work begins to feel stale, you must return to the larger purpose and goal that impelled you in the first place. This bigger idea governs your smaller paths of investigation and opens up many more such paths for you to look into. By constantly reminding yourself of your purpose, you will prevent yourself from fetishizing certain techniques or from becoming overly obsessed with trivial detail. In this way, you will play into the natural strengths of the human brain, which wants to look for connections on higher and higher levels. She really kicked it up higher and higher and higher and making those connections. So I can see why this is an excellent example for a creative strategy. Number 7, the evolutionary hijack. Human creativity generally follows a similar path, perhaps indicating a kind of organic fatality to the creation of anything. Ideas do not come to us out of nowhere. Instead, we come upon something by accident. If we are experienced enough and the moment is ripe, this accidental encounter will spark some interest in associations and ideas in us. In looking at the particular materials we can work with, we suddenly see another way to use them. All along the way, contingencies pop up that reveal different paths we can take, and if they are promising, we follow them, not sure where they will lead. The lesson is simple. What constitutes true creativity is the openness and adaptability of our spirit. When we see or experience something, we must be able to look at it from several angles to see other possibilities beyond the obvious ones. We imagine that the objects around us can be used and co opted for different purposes. We do not hold on to our original idea out of sheer stubbornness or because our ego is tied up with its rightness. Instead, we move with what presents itself to us in the moment, exploring and exploiting different branches and contingencies. We thus manage to turn feathers into flying material. The difference then is not some initial creative power of the brain, but in how we look at the world and the fluidity with which it can reframe what we see. Creativity and adaptability are inseparable. Number 8, dimensional thinking. You are not in a hurry. You prefer a holistic approach. You look at the object of study from as many angles as possible, giving your thoughts added dimensions. You assume that the parts of any whole interact with one another and cannot be completely separated. In your mind, you get as close to the complicated truth and reality of your object of study as possible. In the process, great mysteries will unravel themselves before your eyes. And number 9, strategy, alchemical creativity and the unconscious. Your task as a creative thinker is to actively explore the unconscious and contradictory parts of your personality and to examine similar contradictions and tensions in the world at large. Expressing these tensions within your work in any medium will create a powerful effect on others, making them sense unconscious truths or feelings that have been obscured or repressed. You look at society at large and the various contradictions that are rampant. For instance, the way in which a culture that espouses the ideal of free expression is charged with an oppressive code of political correctness that tamps free expression down. In science, you look for ideas that go against the existing paradigm or that seem inexplicable because they are so contradictory. All of these contradictions contain a rich mine of information about a reality that is deeper and more complex than the one immediately perceived. By delving into the chaotic fluid zone below the level of consciousness where opposites meet, you'll be surprised at the exciting and fertile ideas that will come bubbling up to the surface. So that was the 9 strategies that you can start implementing today if you're looking for some ideas and some concepts. And he goes on to say, understand, to create a meaningful work of art or to make a discovery or invention requires great discipline, self-control, and emotional stability. It requires mastering the forms of your field. Drugs and madness only destroy such powers. Do not fall for the romantic myths and cliches that abound in culture about creativity, offering us the excuse or panacea that such powers can come cheaply. When you look at the exceptionally creative works of masters, you must not ignore the years of practice, the endless routines, the hours of doubt, and the tenacious overcoming of obstacles. These people endured. Creative energy is the fruit of such efforts and nothing else. Which brings us full circle from the quote I shared at the beginning of the show. Just remember, You have that creative being in you. You have it in you. And it's building on all of those tips we shared, the emotions, the strategies, the thought process, just something to get the blood flowing and knowing. And you might have to listen to this a number of times. As mentioned, I highly recommend you buy the book. However, if it's not in your wheel, well, then I am so thrilled that you are here, because guess what? Next week is the final chapter on how it all infuses together. You're not going to want to miss that. Hit that subscribe button. Give yourself a notification bell. We are on the path to mastery, and creativity is the secret of your wealth and success. I'll see you then.